Hello and welcome to the Business of Story, where we explore classic storytelling wisdom amplified through today's technology to transform how you excel through the stories you tell. I'm Park Howell, and today we're diving into brand positioning paralysis that frustrates business leaders trying to differentiate in oversaturated markets. Our guest is Laura Reis, the daughter of famous positioning wizard Al Ries, chairwoman of global consulting firm Reis, and best-selling author of The Strategic Enemy: How to Build and Position a Brand Worth Fighting For. Laura reveals her strategic enemy framework that transforms competitive confusion into category ownership, demonstrating how classical positioning principles enhanced by enemy identification create unshakable competitive advantage. If you've ever struggled with generic positioning that fails to differentiate your brand, this conversation will transform your approach to market leadership and create lasting competitive advantage through focused positioning mastery. Even if you've already identified your strategic enemy, how well is your brand actually telling its story to position against that antagonist? Now you can get a brand story assessment for free with our new StoryCycle Genie brand story grader. Just visit StoryCycleGenie.ai, click on the white button that says Get a Free Brand Story Assessment, provide your name, email address, and your website's URL, and in under 30 seconds, you will get the grade for how well your brand story is communicating your core positioning. Plus, the Genie provides a 14-point assessment on each of the core storytelling segments that you need to be performing well in to grow your business. You don't need a credit card, just you and your URL to get a full brand story audit in under 30 seconds. It'll validate what you're doing well, reveal the gaps in your story that can easily be fixed, and inspire you with fresh ways to think about your brand story. So take a second to visit StoryCycleGenie.ai and see how your brand story is showing up in the world for free. Now, let's bring in our guest, Laura Reis. Laura, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Man, we're talking to another legendary family in the advertising, branding, positioning world. I mentioned, when we were getting acquainted that I had Cameron Day on the show a couple months ago, and he's the son of legendary Guy Day of Chiat back in the day. And Sarah Nay, a friend of yours who is the daughter of John Jantz at Duct Tape Marketing, who's just come out with a book. So there's a bit of a passing of the guard happening right now.
Well, it's super exciting, isn't it? I mean, it's, why not go into the business of your family? When did that become such a bad thing? I think it's so cool. And excited to see others following the path that I have so much enjoyed for my career.
Well, and you as a young lady, young girl growing up in the Reis household with, he wrote the legendary book on positioning. Yeah. I mean, it's like the Bible on positioning. Were you always enamored with the marketing world, the positioning world growing up?
I mean, I was a little. It kind of went in stages. My dad ran an advertising agency, so I could relate to it. I watched TV. I saw jingles. I was like, hey, I could do that. I went to the agency with him, and he has a great story. And, he would stick me in a corner with magic markers and paper, and I would draw my own ads. I don't even remember some of this, but, he said, I would give it to my dad, and my dad was amazing. He'd always say, terrific, Laura, it's terrific. And I was very happy. And he said very funnily, he said, it was a couple days after or a couple weeks after I took you to the agency, you came back to me and you said, Dad, when's my ad going to run? I was 5. So, I thought, I was just as good as he was from an early age, apparently. But yeah, it was always, part of the family experience. My dad, that was his thing. I mean, that's what he talked about at dinner, on vacation, whatever it was. What are brands doing? What are companies doing? The advertising, the positioning. And so it just kind of became part of the conversation. But I never really got serious about it until he gave me the book. I was 9 when it came out. I threw it on the shelf, never looked at it again. Well, not never again, but it wasn't until middle school
Well, that's
that
pretty heavy reading for a 9-year-old,
for
isn't
a
it?
9-year-old, yeah, I wasn't a big reader. But, listen, I wasn't impressed either, so that was the thing, I was like, Whatever, dad, a book." But in middle school, for some reason, I picked it up and I read it and was blown away. It was interesting, even to a middle schooler, and, if you've read Positioning or any of the Reis books or maybe my book, we try to make it fun, we try to make it relatable, we try to make it interesting, but also applicable and explaining the world around us of why things work, why they don't. It makes you feel like you can do it, which
Mhm.
is really exciting. And to me as a middle schooler, I was like, wow, like I was impressed with my dad, and I was really impressed with the idea and wanting to do that too. And so it was kind of an unsaid thing. But we got together and he would help me on my homework and schoolwork projects. And we used to, did slide presentations when I was in fifth grade and got really into it. And we kind of had that bond over the work. And, it wasn't whatever project, but it was how you presented it. And the visual was always incredibly important. How we made it simple, how we made it understandable, how you presented and talked and explained things. And I got that at an early age, and I'm so grateful. And I loved it. And so, actually, my first job was at TBWA
Oh, yeah.
in New York City. I did a very brief year until I was like, what am I doing? I have the greatest opportunity ever to work with Ries. And, there's something to be said about being an apprentice.
Mhm.
You learn so much. And I took that, to heart. I mean, I really did learn from the master. And, those first couple of years, I was just soaking up everything I could.
Well, here's something I always wanted to ask your father. I never met him, never talked to him, he never knew him, but maybe you can answer it for us. In all the multifaceted layers of advertising and marketing and branding, there is
Mhm.
writing, there's strategy, there's design, there's AI now. I mean, there's
Yeah.
all kinds, media buying, you name it. When did it really hit your father and maybe you saw them go through this, that like positioning, starting with that base camp for the brand, act one, if you will, to
Yeah.
set the scene for the brand and positioning? When did that really take hold with him? Because running an agency, he's looking at everything, but obviously his calling card and his legacy is based around positioning. How did that
Yeah, it's
start?
it's one word, absolutely. It's a very interesting story actually, and, he loved to talk about it and tell it, but so he was enamored with advertising. He read the Huckster's book and, just thought that would be cool to do. He came from a very small town, very little. He went into the military and then just found advertising after college and worked at GE and then went to New York City to live the advertising dream, but he was running a very small B2B advertising agency. And Reese Capiel Caldwell in the 60s, right, of the Mad Men era of advertising. And they were trying to establish the agency brand. And it really was, trying to figure out how can we position, before the word came out, the agency? How can we differentiate ourselves from all the other agencies who are much bigger and much more famous? So they wanted a different approach for their clients as well as how the agency, worked with the clients. And so the original concept my father came up with was calling it the rock. He said every ad needs to have a rock, an indisputable truth that will get in the mind of the consumer, that it will be, instantly accepted. And if we can do that, people will pay attention to it and it'll be much, more believable and much more powerful as a result. And so that then morphed into, with his partner, Jack Trout, who was at the agency at the time, into, Jack said, well, what about if we call it a position in the mind? And then my dad was like, great, we'll call it positioning as the principle. And, that set them on the course of writing articles. The big splash was this 3-part series in Advertising Age that was very controversial at the time. I mean, people were debating whether these two guys no one's heard of had the worst idea ever. And because the adversary or strategic enemy of positioning was creativity. They actually specifically called it out. Why? Not because they didn't like it, but because they knew they needed a dramatic contrasting difference to what their idea was, what the current philosophy was just great creative advertising could do the work. A creative ad could do the work of 10 ads, right? And, while that was fine in the 60s, going into the 70s, they talked about the over-communicated society. People weren't just believing advertising. Do you believe an advertisement? I don't. It's what you say about yourself. It's not believable. The best advertising is when you reinforce a position that's already believed, right? So that's when it's powerful. To get in the mind, you need that rock, you need that position that's instantly accepted. So that's how it took off and it became this big debate. And, that created the excitement and
Mhm.
interest in it. And then the book was published then in 1981. And as they say, the rest is history.
Well, to me, innovation is so fascinating because the greatest products out there start with that individual creating it for themselves, trying to figure something out. So in their case, they were like, how do we position our brand? How do we are another
Yeah,
agency and a mire of agencies out there.
that's right.
How do we stand out? And then they have this aha moment of positioning. And then they're very smart. They go and say, okay, we have to have a strategic enemy and creativity. And I think really the enemy there is jumping to creativity before you have strategy in place, before you have position in place. So creativity is not bad in and of itself. It just doesn't work very well if you're not properly positioned and have a strategy to communicate that position. Then and only then does creativity actually work.
No, absolutely. And you do have it's very important to set up that contrast when you're trying to sell, a new idea. We wrote a book called the initial I'll give you the initial title first. The initial title was going to be called The PR Error. Because we were writing a book about the power of using PR and building the credibility, generating word of mouth and third party endorsement for your idea. But that title was so boring. So a friend, Rance Crane at Advertising Age said, why don't you, make it a little bit more exciting? So we said, yeah, okay. We said, oh, Rance, how about the death of advertising and the rise of PR? That's shocking, isn't it? And Rance said, that might go a little bit too far. Our magazine is called Advertising Age. We can't write about that. So we ended up calling it The Fall of Advertising and the Rise of PR. But here's the thing, if you read that book, we say great things about advertising. We
Mhm.
don't say it's terrible. We just say it's not very useful. It's not very cost effective in trying to, communicate a new idea. But it is very important and very strategically important to, maintain a brand once established. I mean, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nike, Google, they need massive advertising because they have strong brands that they need to defend. And they have strong positions and leadership positions, and most importantly, in the mind of the consumer.
Mhm. Now, positioning is more important than ever, I believe, because we live in this land of abundance. We all have abundant choices on who to work with and who to work for and where to go, where to eat, what car to buy. I mean, we do not live in a land of scarcity.
No,
So
it's too many choices. My
without
gosh.
scarcity, everything becomes a commodity, and without a positioning, a position
Mhm.
you could really own, then you become totally commoditized, and that's a race to the bottom. So you've got the new book, The Strategic Enemy, and you are about, pointing out what is it that you as a brand are out to help a customer overcome, really their enemy, and you
Mhm.
become their mentor, guide to help them do that. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And listen, the enemy is not about, something being bad or evil or wrong. It's just an oppositional force that your brand or your category stands against. Now, it could be a competitor, but it also can be another category. It can be a convention or a concept. But it's important because when you can, instead of making claims your brand is better, it's better to contrast with that strategic enemy how your brand is different. Because when you start talking about how your brand is different, it sets up a communication, right? Of, well, why is it different? And how does that make it better? And so that's what lends itself to this, interest, to talk, to debate, and eventually, leading to acceptance and hopefully, landing that position in the mind of the consumer.
So you must be good friends with Sally Hogshead because she has built an entire career around different is better than better.
Of course. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's, a fundamental, principle of positioning, but there also is very important, and you'll never find a strategic enemy. It's very hard to be different unless you have a focus, right?
Hmm.
But trying to be too many things to too many people, over expanding, line extending, is the danger of brand building, right? Because, without a narrow focus, you can't stand for something. And without standing for something, you can't have a position. And when you can clearly identify what you're not, to say to people, we are not going to sell you hamburgers, this is not going to happen here, it makes it much clearer what you do stand for. Maybe it's chicken sandwiches, and you're very good at chicken sandwiches because that's your focus. And maybe, if you've guessed it, that brand is Chick-fil-A, and they've taken that strategic enemy to to their advertising to the extreme, and they have cows with signs saying eat more chicken. I mean, can you imagine the agency pitch when they pitched this 30 years ago? The crazy company would have run it for a month. The smart company has stuck with it for 3 decades.
Yeah.
There's power in the repetition of that very strong idea, that is not just, I mean, believe me, it's creative, it's cute advertising, but it also has a very strong, connection to positioning. And it also illustrates the importance of the category over the brand. What do I mean? Yes, brands at the end of the day are incredibly important. We speak in brands, but we think in categories. And I mean that you think category first when you're making almost any decision. You want to have something to eat. You don't think what brand I want. You think, do I want pizza? Do I want chicken? Do I want burgers? Right?
Yeah.
Do I want a burrito? And then you look in that folder and say, what's the best brand for burritos? You don't think McDonald's or Chipotle, you think Chipotle, right? Because they
Mhm.
dominate that category. And so, having a brand that is focused on a category is very important, but it also means that you live or die based on that category. So Chick-fil-A, great branding, great execution, but they're also riding the expansion and success of chicken as a category. We're eating a ton more chicken than ever before, for many reasons. It's got sort of this healthy halo, right? Of Even though it's fried, but people perceive it as a healthier alternative to burgers and fries. So that the category is incredibly important.
Okay, let's talk about one, and thank you for that example. I love these examples. One of them that you talk about is Dude Wipes,
Oh my
which
gosh,
to
my
me, I
favorite.
think is a brilliant, brilliant product that came out. But you identified a different enemy than I identify as a dude. So let me know what your thinking is there, and then I'm going to share the enemy that is disgusting that I really think that they are competing against.
Oh, I can't wait for your answer. So, my answer is, Dude Wipes. If you don't know, these are wipes you use in the bathroom when you do number two. But the brand was started about a bunch of guys, friends from like elementary school, just had graduated college, living in a big house. And he said, eating a lot of burritos, late night drinking, they need to clean up good. And he was buying baby wipes. They loved them. I mean, nice way to clean up, but they weren't flushable. They didn't have environmentally, were natural or whatever. So he said, why isn't anyone making this? And that's a problem that many entrepreneurs, they find the problem and they develop the solution. And so he came out with something that was totally branded and totally took on an enemy, which he named as toilet paper. Dry toilet paper just doesn't cut it. Wetter beats dry. Wetter is better. Here's the funny thing. He didn't invent this idea. There had been, for at least a decade, the major toilet paper brands had line extended into these, they called it moist flushable wipes. Doesn't that sound exciting? Right?
Right.
And Cottonelle and everyone else, but they never really strongly, took a stance against toilet paper. I mean, that's 99.9% of their business. They couldn't say toilet paper sucks, but Dude Wipes did. Send toilet paper back to the ages. When you have a focus, you can go hard against your strategic enemy. It's the same thing in cars. I mean, if you're selling, gasoline cars and you add electric, your electric can't say the gas sucks, right? So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, not able to really strongly position either of them. the answer is with a second brand, of course, but and Dude Wipes, tremendous success. I just, love watching this brand take on. And listen, when you have that focus, you can have fun with it. And they certainly do. And really, well, what's your take? I'm dying to know.
It's what their take was, because in your book, I believe you were talking about their enemy was feminine hygiene, and nobody was paying attention to the masculine hygiene.
Well, no, okay. Well, that's another very interesting angle.
Yeah.
The positioning is not easy, these things.
No, they're not.
Well, simple, the answers are always simple, but the background is so multi-layered. Because actually, I also think, they were going against dry toilet paper, but they could have taken a unisex approach, right? So they could have said it's good for ladies. I mean, everyone poops, but they didn't. They picked one. And dudes have, you can live on Dude Wipes alone. I mean, basically, you only use it, for that anyway. So that was a good positioning. And that allowed them to go the extra step in going all dude and making it, crazy and funny and just in a dude-like way, which really added to it. So I think they went that extra step in narrowing the focus because, yeah, you're right. I mean, baby wipes and all the other kind of wet things were also very feminine focused because,
Mhm.
toilet paper in general is sold to women. We use a lot of it
Yeah.
versus men. So it just had multiple things going on that's, makes it so interesting.
So we were traveling through Bavaria and Switzerland last October, and I found myself in the beautiful scenic town of Mürren up in Switzerland and doing a lot of hiking and a lot of eating of rich foods and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And the toilet paper was horrendous. And I texted a buddy of mine, Paul, who travels all over the world. And I said, I thought the Geneva Convention outlawed the use of this kind of toilet paper. And he wrote back, he goes, Dude Wipes, man. Bring Dude Wipes wherever you go. So to me, the enemy was that coarse, horrible, horrific,
Oh, of
thin
course. Yeah, it
toilet
is
paper.
and he talks about the tragic failure in butt maintenance. And listen, there are times where line extension can work. He has launched, it's called Little Dudes for now the little guys. And, I think, teaching our young boys proper toilet behavior is a great direction. And, there can be cases where you can do that. But here's the thing. What you want to do is focus all of your promotion, your big billboards, your TV advertising on Dude Wipes. When you have a line extension child, you don't have to give it equal attention. This is not like parenting real kids, right? You could actually ignore one kid and not feed it anything and give it all to the kid, that is your biggest bang for the buck. And that's the main Dude Wipes brand.
Now, you've got a framework that we could talk our listeners through real quick on helping them identify their enemy, what their brand is not, and what they are for, and how they help people overcome. Can you quickly walk us through that and the importance of each one of those steps?
Yeah, no, there's multiple. I call them all the tools in my positioning toolbox, because positioning the book, it talked all about owning a word in the mind, and that is that's the end goal. But getting that word in there is not easy.
And is that a negative word or a positive word? You want to own that word that is really targeting your enemy?
Well, here's the thing: the best word to own is leadership. Leadership. I mean, think about what does Dude Wipes own? It owns, wet wipes, right? For humans. And so it's leadership in that category. And as a result, Dude Wipes becomes the category. I mean, your friend just said Dude Wipes. He didn't, say buy the wet toilet paper brand Dude Wipes. It's Dude Wipes. And so ultimately that is the strongest position. Now, if you have a leader in the category, say for example, Walmart, they are, the leading retailer in the world. And so if you're Target, what do? You can't compete against Walmart on price. You can't be Walmart but better, but you can be Walmart but different. So Target's a mass retailer, but what did they do? Their spin was they're a little bit more fashionable. They call it Target, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you can shop there and so it's cleaner, it's whiter. The everything is a little bit more fashion oriented. So
right there with the timely thing you pointed out with Target, they are just replacing their CEO because sales are down.
I know. Well, and
is
what
there
did
a
they
point
say?
that positioning doesn't work? Yeah.
No, what they said, and this is always true, we got to get back to fashionable. We got to get back
Oh,
to style because over time, you take what you own for granted, don't we? We think, well, we own Target. Everybody knows that. We don't have to remind them. Let's go into some other direction. Uh-uh. You got to constantly reinforce it. You can't take your eye off the ball. I call it the anchor. That's what holds your brand in the mind. And you got to keep weight on that anchor. And you'll see time after time, these big companies, they get distracted, they become unfocused, they don't reinforce that anchor. And you see the headline, going back to the basics. That's what happened at Starbucks, going back to coffee. Suddenly the, advertisements end. Starbucks, the coffee company. Yeah, no kidding. What
and
were you
they're
doing
and
with
they're
all
on
this food?
in decline as well. They've kind of lost their way and trying to find their way back. With Target, is their enemy expensive fashion?
No, I think their enemy is Walmart. Walmart has everything, but it is not fashionable, and they've tried. They have
Gotcha.
tried to have fashion shows, and you can't be everything to everyone. If I was
Mhm.
Walmart, I wouldn't try to be fashionable. Just try to have basic you can have clothes, you can have things, but don't try to, out-trend, Target and Old Navy and the other brands that own that. You're in a weak position trying to do that. You gotta
Mhm.
come at your strength. Don't try to prop up the weakness. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You have the very low price. You've got a very strong position, and they do very well in that. And they're doing great job, internally in the store of better merchandising and even some slightly more expensive items like in food and other things, but at very low prices. That's their thing.
Yeah. So that word you said is leadership, but really what it is the leader in something, in
That's
some
right. In the
defined category.
category.
Yeah.
In the category, yeah. The category is incredibly important. So, when working with clients, that's the first thing is, so what is your category, right?
Mhm.
And if, is there an opportunity to create a new category? That is incredibly powerful. Now, it's not always the case, and then you have to compete within the category itself. But if we're creating a new category, who's the enemy? Is it the old category that we're going against that we want to, differentiate from? And what do we name the category? That's incredibly important. And then how does our brand name link into it? For example, Mike's Hard Lemonade was doing great. It was, hard lemonade. Everyone thought it was delicious. People, young kids or not kids, but, appropriately drinking adults.
At our age, they're young kids.
Yeah, that's right. I know. So, but they instead of beer, they were going to these other drinks. And as a company, but they suddenly noticed in the early 2000s is, Mike's Hard Lemonade has a lot of sugar. It's like 32 grams and a lot of calories. This is becoming uncool. And so instead of a line extension, although they did a few, they thought of a new brand, and that was White Claw. And
Mm.
this is taken over. Listen, does it taste good? No. Right? But it's an easily understandable category connected with a great brand name, lends itself to a visual, and they were able to be first in the mind. Here's the thing, they weren't first in the market. There was a product called Spike Seltzer. But Spike Seltzer was in a glass bottle. It had too generic a name. White Claw went in cans. It was unisex, appealing to friends that are hanging out, and did a lot of great things that were different from what everyone else is doing. All the other brands, beer was for guys and wine was for girls. Well, that's not how the kids think about things. They don't draw those lines. They all hang out together. And right now, they're all drinking White Claw.
Mhm. So your first step is to think about that word, that one word you can own in the
Yeah.
market, design a category around that, and then
Yeah.
what's next?
Well, when thinking about the category, and the White Claw is a perfect example, many times it's what do we say no to? For White Claw, we want to say no to sugar. We want to say no to carbs. And those beers, whether it's light beer, any beer, and those other hard alcohol, hard teas, full of sugar. So that's going to be our enemy. And that allows us to create this new category that has the enemy. We've said no to something. No is a very powerful word. No is what draws the line in the sand. And you have to remember that. Flipping back to dude wipes, don't fall in love with your brand. That is a strategic danger of any great entrepreneur because it happens. It's natural. You fall in love with it. And, Sean at Dude Wipes, he fell in love with it. And he had, in it was 2018, he was dreaming of a dude nation. We're going to have dude deodorant, dude soap. Dude will own the bathroom from butt wipes to underarms. It makes no sense. But, people get crazy when they fall in love.
I'm glad you didn't go from butt wipes to toothpaste. So
Yes. He hadn't thought of that, but I bet he would've. But actually, he launched those in 2019, and just so happens he read the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Ries and Jack Trout, and got to the chapter on line extension and said, and I quote, "Oh shit, maybe this is not a that maybe this is a big mistake. I need to stay focused on my category and grow that." I mean, there were only not even there were a couple 100 million. I mean, that's nothing. The
So
potential is
So
huge.
when you're saying don't fall in love with your brand, don't fall in love to it to the point that you think it's going to take over the world and all these different line extensions. Always
That's
stay
right.
focused on that initial core brand offering and enemy for that matter.
It it's true. It is, because the category is more important to the consumer. While they verbalize your brand and they may tell you they love your brand, they're unlikely to buy deodorant, at least not in significant portions. And on the flip side, that limits your internal resources. Because what happened to dude wipes? In 2020, we had the pandemic, and everyone ran to the supermarket and bought anything on the shelf. And
Mhm.
many people at that time discovered dude wipes because once you do a dude wipe, you don't go back. And because he got out of the deodorant and lost the distractions, he ramped up all his time, all his energy on dude wipes. He upped the marketing, he upped the manufacturing, and allowed him to take advantage of that moment in time and to drive the success and continue that because it takes a lot of energy to grow a category, and you can't take it for granted. And, putting that one brand name on multiple things will, dilute the power of dude wipes. When you put that on a shopping list, there is no doubt what, the person you've asked will come home with.
Mhm. What's one of your other favorite brands that is sort of surprising in how they're telling their story and the enemy that they have defined? And I think it's interesting because storytelling, of course, is about conflict and enemies.
Yes,
Frank
every
Danielle's, the famous copywriting coach and teacher at USC, said, "A story is only as good as the villain is evil." And so
exactly.
it plays over to branding, does it not? Your brand position is only as good as the problem you are solving is evil or
Yeah.
bad or
Yeah,
tough.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a difference, but
Mhm.
absolutely, you cannot be a hero unless there's a villain. I mean, that's entirely what, your positioning is best, communicated by contrasting it to some other way, whether it's a problem or a different way. There was the good tasting scope and there was the medicine breath, Listerine, but it was the taste you hate twice a day. I mean, that drove the efficacy claim, but also, there is a positioning opportunity for the good tasting. Or Hertz was the leader. Ava said, "We're number two. We try harder." So many classic cases of companies that have used this, even back to 7 Up being the Uncola, right? Because it was trying to say, don't, the enemy was everyone drinking cola. We're the Uncola. That connected it to, the opposing category, if you will. But
Mhm.
the storytelling is huge these days. It is so critically important. And, having and linking that brand name into, what you're doing, as well as how it contrasts to the alternative or the enemy that you're fighting against. One of my favorite brands is the farmer's dog. And this is,
Oh, I love those ads.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I
Yeah,
mean,
they're so well done.
so well done. Well, they focused on dogs and they're focused on, people human grade food, lightly cooked, fresh food for your dog. Now, they could, like many companies, just talk about themselves and we're great, we're great, we're great. But what they've very strategically done is told us a lot about their strategic enemy, and that is dry food. I've owned dogs my whole life. And, when I was a kid, we used to feed my dog, my little poodle, Mighty Dog in the can. I thought that was healthy. And then the veterinarian said, no, 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 this, science diet, the dry food is much more healthy. Well, here comes Farmer's Dog. They've got to compete with that position in the mind. They've got to reposition, dry dog food as not being healthy. So what did they do? They said, burnt brown balls are the enemy. Your dog food, dry dog food, is highly, highly processed. You don't want to eat highly processed food for every meal of your life. It will, shorten your life. Why are you feeding that to your dog? Well, that's an emotional message. I get goosebumps. Actually, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. I mean, our dogs are so important to us. Feeding them processed food, they've converted a lot of people over to the farmer's dog way of, long live dogs is their slogan. But it very importantly goes up against don't feed them processed food or they won't live very long.
Well, in the ad, the one that the first time I saw it, where the guy's in and he's making guy spaghetti for his girlfriend, and the girlfriend comes in, opens the refrigerator door, and smirks, makes a judgment about the food being
Yeah.
in the door. And next thing you know, you see she gets thrown out, and he's having dinner with the dog. And in that case, the enemy it doesn't differentiate or it doesn't depart from that dry dog food enemy. It helps underscore the difference of what they're about. But the enemy in that case is the judgment of other people, of how
Yeah.
could you possibly think
Oh,
of spending
shame.
that kind of time and money and on your dog food.
Well, wait till I wait till I tell you. That's not a farmer's dog commercial.
Oh no, did I just blow it?
No, actually, you've proved my point. Thank you very much. That brand is called Fresh Pet.
You're right.
Horrible name, generic name. When you say, if you ask me, do I feed my, dog Fresh Pet? I said, sure, I only buy farmer's dog. It's not when you use a generic word like that, it becomes hard to become an ownable brand in the mind because the mind only hears sound. It doesn't see that it's, in uppercase with a trademark. It only hears sound. That's a category name. That's not a brand name. The brand name Farmer's Dog is far more powerful, far more memorable. And as a result, when you see the, emotional message of those commercials, you forget the generic name and you think, and it reinforces Farmer's Dog, which is much more memorable. So thank you. It proved my point.
Wow, that's really interesting. And it's funny you say that, because as I was recounting that ad, I thought to myself, am I on the right brand? I was literally, and I thought, I'm not sure I'm talking about Farmer's Dog. But as soon as you brought up Farmer's Dog, I thought about it.
Yeah. No, using words that lend themselves to visuals is very powerful. So you know what a farm is, you know what a dog is. It makes it more memorable, even when they don't really have any relation. So you think about a brand name like Starbucks. Those are two words. They're stars and they're bucks, right? You got dollar bucks or, bucks you shoot, whatever it is. But those connections, it has multiple connections in the brain, making it much more memorable.
So interesting. How has this all evolved from your dad's work when they first started with positioning? Because, of course, that was, 50 years ago or so?
Yeah,
maybe more. And life in our environment of communication and storytelling and brand marketing and so forth, living in this land of abundance, how have you seen positioning change, and why then is this book so important for our listeners?
Yeah, well, first of all, positioning is such a revolutionary, exciting concept, and the concept itself has never changed. It's strategy. It's owning a word in the mind is the position is powerful. Now, but what has happened is getting that word in the mind has become even more challenging. What they thought was a over communicated society in the 70s has exploded. And so over the years, in working with clients and traveling around the world, we have clients all over the world, is finding new tools, as I mentioned, that help in the positioning process. So, one of the most important critical tools of positioning is what I call the visual hammer. And the visual hammer is a visual that hammers in that word into the mind. Because words aren't exciting, words aren't emotional, but images are. So even if you're trying to communicate the same thing, whether it's the name of the store Target and the bullseye Target symbol, that symbol is much more memorable, much more powerful, much more emotional. Or you get to something like the Coca-Cola iconic bottle. It's a very powerful visual hammer. Why? Because it communicates something also about the brand. When you see that bottle, it reinforces that Coca-Cola is the real thing, or that Corona with the lime in the top is, the beer from Mexico. And those visuals are very powerful and extremely important in today's work with positioning. And then, of course, we've talked about the importance of PR and in launching brands, establishing credibility, the category itself. The book Origin of Brands talks about, there's always excitement because there's always opportunity to launch new brands. What starts as one small category like fast food has now branched off into different. But the opportunity is not to go after every branch, but to narrow your focus and be, the the donut chain or the burrito chain, or, pick a slice, pick a narrow focus that you can own. And there's always those new opportunities. And then lastly, the strategic enemy, if you read the original positioning book, it's definitely in there a bit, but I think calling it out in today's time is incredibly important. It's such a useful tool to basically shout out what you don't stand for, what you stand against, in order to make people understand and root for your brand. It's much easier to get them to, to understand what they're against than to say what they're for.
Mhm. And when we do branding work and so forth, we are always looking at that enemy. And I don't know that we articulate it nearly as clearly as you have in your book and so forth. But a part of our story cycle system is a chapter in there that I call the villains, fog, and crevasses that you're dealing with. And we look at it from different levels. First, the business owner. What are the villains, fog, and crevasses you're up against that you can actually leverage and do a jujitsu move on and use that negative energy and turn it to positive to help you move forward? But also asking yourself, and you may have one overall enemy you are slaying, like with the business of story. I've always believed boredom was the thing, because when was the last time you were bored into buying anything? And especially in the B2B world, and I tell people, B2B should not mean boring to bored. You bring story to it. So thinking about the enemies in your audience's life, and depending on your different levels of audiences, they may be combating different enemies that your brand can help solve for. So a long-winded way of saying, are there categories of enemies that we should be looking at from the point of view of our audience that level up to one overall enemy that the brand is trying to slay?
Well, to start with, too many companies are what we call in the mushy middle, particularly in business to business, right? They do a little bit of everything. They're not one way or the other, and that's the worst place to be. You would think the middle of the market is where all the action is. It's at the extremes. Nature favors the extremes, so does branding. So, you can be, and think about a big consulting agency. There's advantages in that. As me, I'm a small consulting agency. I work directly with my clients. That's a huge advantage. But I don't have the resources of a big agency. And so, you have to understand where your strengths are and give up on that. Say no to it and be okay with saying no to your customer. Again, don't be customer focused. Be competitor focused. Your biggest job out there is to differentiate with the competitor, with the enemy, and show why you are the right choice for them, and make that clear, because what you're trying to do is make them feel good about the choice, make them reinforce why they've made that decision, and say, yes, I went with you because I'm going to work directly with Laura. It's going to be a great experience. She knows all about positioning. Or, if you want to go with a big agency, well, they have global contacts. They'll have better this or better that. They can do my advertising, everything. There's always two sides to every coin. And that's why I say, with positioning, when looking at, is my position strong enough? I call it the flip test. So any position should be able to be reversed and still work, right?
Give us an example.
Well, I mean, if you think about, for example, in, graphic design, you've got Adobe. They are the masters. They are the best in class in terms of software. But what is it? It's complicated. And the experts need it complicated. They need to do complicated things. That's fine. But what did Canva do? They said, we're going to make it easy. Anyone can design. You don't need, and they made it super, super simple. I mean, you went overboard. Most people would have tried to be in the middle. We want to have, we want to appeal to the high tech people that, get everybody. But oh no, they went for the very extreme, for people who, just didn't know where to start, and they brought them on board and then expanded that category, which has been such an exciting success. And really, from my perspective, the visual is so important in storytelling and allows people to add visuals that are truly impactful. However, it is a little dangerous when you think about it, because with the rise of AI and Canva, these tools, you have to know what your strategy is, because otherwise you're going to create a bunch of gobbledygook that isn't going to reinforce anything. And if people watch your ad or see your website or anything and they don't remember your brand, they don't remember what you stand for, that's a problem. And that comes from finding the right strategy, but then using it consistently. I mean, it's Chick-fil-A doing it for 30 years. It's BMW saying the ultimate driving machine. It's Nike saying just do it. The power wasn't in just saying it once. The power is in the repetition.
Hmm.
And that's unfortunately, companies get bored. People get bored. I wear red. That's all I wear in terms of business. And listen, it can get a little boring. I look at the purple dresses. I'm like, oh, that would be fun.
You even have a red microphone.
I have a red microphone. I even have a red phone for the hotline when people call me. I go
Wait, that's
all
an
in.
old-fashioned dial phone. Does
It
that thing
is.
actually work?
Oh, no, it's a fake phone. No, it could work if I had
Yeah,
a phone plug. I don't know.
yeah. If it was 1960, sure.
Of course.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and we ran your brand through our
You did.
StoryCycle Genie and sent you the output from that. And of course, this is a new product that we've created, and it is AI driven, but it's totally built on our StoryCycle system, which we've been using for branding over the last 20 years. And a lot of times people will ask me and they'll say, well, aren't you just doing the same thing Donald Miller is doing with StoryBrand? And I go, no, it's totally different because to me, and I don't want to call him an enemy because I think he's a marvelous guy doing great work, but their StoryBrand product is brand Botox to me. It does a
Mm.
great job of adding fluff and puff to a landing page and a marketing piece to be able to make that convert better, which I think is great.
Yeah,
Where our
important.
story cycle system has always gone very deep into the actual heart and soul of your brand story, your vision, your mission, your values. It's built in to what is the enemy? I mean, what are you out to thwart? How are you
Yeah.
going to help people? And so as we have launched this, and every guest on the show, I send their brand through it to get their take on their findings. What did you think of what you saw?
It was fascinating. It was fun to see, my story translated back into this, system and looking at the archetypes and my positioning. I was like, "Oh, am I doing it right?" And my narrative, but it very much eye-opening into the importance of story and it really not what's cool about AI is yeah, I talk about my story, but is it resonating out there? Are people also picking it up? So the AI, is searching for that information to see if if you are being consistent. And I imagine a lot of companies don't get. I think I did pretty well on this. I got a few 10 out of 10s on these things.
Yeah, well, I
Uh,
wasn't surprised actually because I sent April Dunford's brand through the Story Cycle
yeah.
Genie. She scored very high as well, as did Jay Bear, as did people that are at the top of their game in communication. So I'm not surprised that yours came out that well. About
But
the positioning statement, I'm going to read it and
yeah.
I want to hear from you. What did you think of it? This is the way you are showing up in the world as the Story Cycle Genie sees it.
Mhm.
It says, Reis Positioning Pioneers is the only positioning consultancy that provides direct access to the original positioning methodology through the intellectual property creators themselves, transforming competitive struggles into category ownership for senior executives and marketing leaders at established companies.
It's pretty close. Now, it's not perfect, but it is pretty darn close. Not sure I would use the word intellectual property, but I
Hmm.
might tweak that. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. But I mean, for sure. I mean, what are we? I mean, I name my new Substack, Reis is positioning. I mean,
Hmm.
that's our word. That's what we own. We are the original. We are the pioneers. We apply it. We know it like nobody's business and we work directly with you, right? We're not just and that's all we do. I mean, focus is incredibly important. Actually, it didn't come, necessarily easy. As I said, my dad ran a traditional advertising agency. What happened was the positioning idea took off. And so people came to him like Burger King said, we love your thoughts on positioning, but we're not going to hire your agency. Right? I mean, we're not going to do
We
that.
want your specialty.
Yeah, we just want to sit down with you and Jack and work on the strategy. And so slowly over time, that business built up. And by the mid 80s, it literally was 50-50 in terms of, but they were competing against each other because the agency or, the people coming for the agency felt slighted by the consulting, not being as important as the consulting. And the consulting people felt like, oh my gosh, they're going to try to make us hire their agency and we don't want to. So my dad was giving a speech and someone raised their hand and said, listen, Al, you're talking about focus and positioning. You're not following your own advice. You're running an agency and a consulting business. And he took it to heart. He said, aha. And they took 2 years and they shut down the agency. And so literally shutting down 50% of their business. But what that did was it expanded their time to devote to consulting and to become, even better at consulting, to expand that. And he felt led to his greatest success in his life of being able to do that, which was also what he really loved instead of running a big agency. So it worked out in so many terrific ways.
Well, his name is, and your last name is synonymous with positioning.
It certainly is, but it is so important to continue to talk about it, not take it for granted. Actually, we made a bit of a mistake, or should we get to the mistake? I thought of one.
Yeah, let's hear the mistake.
Yes, well, it's interesting because when an idea like positioning takes off, it was crazy insane in the 80s and the wars and the books and everything, but it got adopted, which was a great thing, right? What company doesn't have a positioning statement? Everyone has one. So that success was phenomenal, but it also led to it becoming just another thing, and they all were not even doing it right. The
Hmm.
biggest challenge was that positioning wasn't, being true to the original concept, meaning most companies had a positioning statement that said, we sell a wide range of products in a number of industries with great service and reasonable prices. That's not positioning. We
That's
would
the
put
mushy middle.
yeah, absolutely. That is not what the concept is about. And so he wrote a book. He was so frustrated. He wrote a book called Focus. And that was around the time I joined him and the firm. And he's like, we got to fight this. So we started talking about ourselves. Instead of positioning consultants, we said we're focus consultants, thinking that was, so important. And we wanted to highlight that as being our difference. But we lost sight of the power of positioning.
And
And,
people don't
in
know what that means. It goes back to that fresh pet, it focus
that's right.
consultants. You're like, what?
What?
Positioning owns something in
It
your
does.
mind.
It does. And not only that, it has a very strong visual with the head that is tremendously effective and, memorable for us. We use the red color. That was integral in the early days of the agency. He had a red ampersand that we've translated and gone full on and with red as our primary color. But yeah, that was definitely a misstep in terms of, stepping away from making that prominent as our thing. And so, reclaiming that then, a decade later was incredibly important. And here's the thing. I mean, things ride. And what's interesting is that, positioning has stood this test of time. People, are chasing other things, the dawn of the internet and all these things. And does positioning really matter, or do we just run ads and create a website? Well, it turns out at the end of the day, the positioning does matter. And in fact, it's having, just a major resurgence of excitement and interest in talking about it, because as all the tactics have come and gone, from metrics and big data and now AI, you realize that without the right fundamental positioning strategy, all of that isn't going to work. In building a brand, you do need positioning. Now, how you grow a brand, absolutely, you need to expand distribution, right? You need to grow the category. You need a visual hammer and distinctiveness, absolutely. But positioning as the core is still incredibly essential.
Well, it's kind of like what you had said a little while back about AI and all the great things that it can do for you. But without strategy, then you are going to end up creating a lot of just shots in the dark all
Yeah.
over the place. And I kind of, in my brain, I have no idea why this popped in, but I kind of equated it to Frankenstein.
Yes.
Technology brings him together, animates him to life, and he's that becomes your communication in the world through using AI. That's going to amplify that. And let's go way back to the bionic man and bionic woman, where they're built with intention and technology, and they're super strong and all this because there was a strategy behind what they're building. And so if you don't start with that core position strategy, AI is just going to amplify your mania.
And
basically.
could push you in the wrong direction. I think what,
Hmm.
company leaders have to it comes from the top, the idea of what the brand is, what the positioning is, but putting up those guardrails as to what we're gonna say no to, what we're not going to do, and keeping our story straight and
Hmm.
clear and focused, and then using those tools, but really putting up the guardrails. Because too many people can create content, can put posts up online, can, talk about and push your brand in too many different directions. You really do need to keep those guardrails very strong in order to maintain that consistency that's so necessary. And that's why it stands out. I mean, when you see a brand like Chick-fil-A and how they've, been able to deliver and their, the interiors of their stores are just it's beautiful. It stands out because it's different. Is it better? Who knows? I mean, better is always relative. The most important thing is that you're different, and that difference is reinforced in your positioning.
They put in a Chick-fil-A right across the very busy boulevard from our agency down in Phoenix, and a building we still own down there. And people would line up and stop traffic
Oh,
in the boulevard to
yeah.
get in there. And they were 20 cars deep. And my wife, Michelle, had never eaten at a Chick-fil-A. And I'd made my way over there a couple times for lunch. And she goes, "It must be absolutely fabulous chicken." And I was literally like, "It's all right. I don't know. It just is another chicken sandwich to me." But
It
boy,
was
do
the
they own it.
original chicken sandwich, though. I
Yeah.
mean, when you're first in something, people just believe you're better. When you're the leader in something, they believe it you're better. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the trick of perception. Leadership does really have, tremendous input in adjusting those perceptions, and they've ridden it extremely well by maintaining they don't sell anything but chicken.
Mhm.
And that strength is incredibly important. And then, think about operationally, the fewer things you have on the menu, the better you can execute. I mean, think how many things are on the McDonald's menu. Very difficult to do all those well. We
Yeah.
breakfast, we wraps. I mean, they've got so much going on and constantly throwing new things in there. And compare that with In-N-Out Burger. It's basically the original McDonald's menu, and they make, tremendous amount of money. And they haven't
Mhm.
wasted all those resources, chasing every, new menu
They
item.
make burgers.
They make burgers and they make them apparently really good. I'm a vegetarian, so I haven't had one, but, everyone absolutely raves about them, and of course, that word of mouth is very important.
Absolutely. Well, Laura, this has been absolutely fascinating. Last question for you from what the genie saw in your brand position, your overall story. What was your biggest aha moment that it provided you?
Well, I mean, I loved the archetypes, and I think they were all kind of spot on. My number one was the sage, the expert. So, because we're focused on positioning now, I'm not an expert in everything. Don't ask me
Mhm.
about your taxes. Don't ask me, look at your numbers. But in terms of being an expert on positioning and strategy, I love that. But I also love the magician because there is a magic part of positioning that happens when you're working on a strategy. These things aren't easy to find, right?
Mhm.
It is not easy to think up these things, but when you find it, it is kind of that instant magic experience. And so it's a little bit of art, it's a little bit of science, and it's definitely a little bit of magic. And when it happens, it's absolutely magical.
And had you thought about your brand personality having that touch of magic of magician in it before?
I have,
Mhm.
absolutely. And yeah, we do talk about that because, it's hard to explain. I don't have there's not besides like you're going to get your positioning strategy and it's going to be great and the experience is going to be fun. I mean, that's what I'm selling. So I have to believe that they're going to understand that the magic is part of it. And it's been very tremendously important in our brand and selling that. But the other thing, and what we actually do say is one of our deliverables, you have it here as the emotional promise, which is
Mhm.
confidence. But I use the word courage. It's giving you the courage to act on the strategy. And that's just as important as the strategy itself, because a great strategy without the courage is nothing. And that's why, the interactive nature of working together with a client is so important because, I can email them the idea, but,
Mhm.
face to face, talking it out, hearing their pain points, letting them, blabber away, and then, redirecting them, giving them the confidence, showing them how this type of idea has worked in other cases. The case stories is so important. I mean, that's how you get confidence of that positioning will work, that these strategies will work, to see how it has worked in so many companies.
So what you would do inside the genie then is you look at confidence and the emotional promise, and you tell the genie, say, I like it, but I would rather have courage, and here's
Yeah.
quickly why. And then it reruns your brand story, and your emotional promise now becomes courage. And then that helps inform the overall brand narrative and the personalities. One other thing I was going to ask you on the archetypes. So you definitely said Sage, the expert. It's saying that's 65%. That's your
Yeah.
primary archetype. It gave you two secondaries, the creator, which said is 25%, and the magician is 10%.
Yeah.
But you immediately went to the magician. And so my question to you is, would you switch those? Would you bring more of a magician personality into your brand? And doing so, you just tell the genie, I like it, but I don't want it at 10%. I want it at 30% or whatever.
No, actually, I think the percentages are pretty much spot on in terms of Sage being 60%, Creator 25%, creating new categories. That's incredibly important. But it's that little touch of magic. The magic is what you remember. I like that it's 10% because there's incredible amount of knowledge and experience that goes into it. But, it's that little snap of magic that is fun, it's exciting, but it's not all magic. It's not all smoke and mirrors. It's actual real strategy. But when it comes together, it feels magical. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I love. But I mean, it's the hardest thing, and I'm actually redoing my own personal business website. The hardest thing is to look at your own strategy. It is challenging. And I think, being in the midst of it myself, having this, printed out for me is really very helpful and insightful to, reinforce many of the things I already know, to see it written out in multiple ways. And then you can, of course, AI needs you to furtherly prompt them to say,
Mm-hmm.
add more courage or, take out intellectual property. I wouldn't say that word
Mm-hmm.
and, define it. But, overall, it's, a great way to, get a sense of, what other people think about you, because that's incredibly important and that's the place you start. With any client or any strategy, it's not what you think about yourself. What do other people think about you right now? Because that's what we have to deal with. We can't deal with
Mm-hmm.
what you want to be. We have to deal with what they think you are, what they think about, your competitors or your other categories. And then how do we deal with those perceptions to make and position ourselves to be most easily accepted and in contrast to something else, which is the strategic enemy.
Well, your brand is the story people tell about you when you're not in the room. So you
Yeah.
got to make sure that you have shared your story and communicated it correctly so that they're thinking, acting, and telling the proper story.
And to tell, because what is the biggest driver of brands? It's word of mouth.
Hmm.
It's word of mouth and giving people the short story they can tell to other people. That's what's missing. And, they have a long pitch. And I work with a lot of B2B companies and they're like, yeah, if I can just get in the sales meeting for an hour, I can close the deal. I'm like, okay, that's great. I mean, I'm glad you're really good at that, but you're not getting the sales calls, right? You don't have that short story that, people are telling their friends to get you on the short list. Like, what's going to get you on the short list? I mean, that's that singular idea. That's the differentiation because, when B2B companies make a decision, they don't just go with one. They look at one or two or maybe three. Like, how do we get on that short list? The way is not to be like the competitors, it's to be different in some way. And then, of course, if you can get in the meeting and sell, that's great. But it is that, problem of how do we get in that mind? How do we get other people to tell our story? Because that's much more credible and believable. And then we can go in and close that
Hmm.
deal.
Do you know what the emotional promise of the story cycle genie is?
I don't know. Do I? No.
No, it helped me arrive at this, and I absolutely loved it because it was different. But it is the expression I've seen on people's faces when they use it, and the emotional promise is to be enthralled,
Mm,
because they see the story like in minutes magically appear before their eyes, but it's built off of this foundation and they light up. They're like enthralled by it. And then you think about how that cascades down. Don't you want a brand position in a story that enthralls your audiences to come in? And by the way,
yeah.
the definition of enthralled is to create the fascinated attention for something. And isn't that really what all brand positioning you want it to do, is create a fascinated attention on your position?
That's exactly it. And that's only going to come if you have a narrow focus. I mean, if hopefully you are a leader in a category, that's where the fascination comes and that's where the interest, that's where the excitement comes. And if you can then tell your story, repeat that story, make it simple, make it clear, use visuals, incredibly important. Those visuals, never underestimate the power of a visual. Think about the Masters golf tournament. There's a lot of golf tournaments out there. But there's one that's the top of the mind, and it's the Masters. Now, yeah, is Augusta beautiful? Sure. But they give a green jacket. Is a green jacket fashionable? Not so much. But it's so different
Hmm.
that
And on
stands
brand.
out. I
Yeah.
mean, that is, the most coveted photo is, the old winner putting that jacket on the new winner and seeing that. I mean, what a powerful, way to represent that brand with just a jacket. I mean, it's a ugly green jacket.
You wished it was red, I bet.
Yeah, but listen, it would not be exciting if it was red.
Yeah.
So, that's the thing. When you think about colors, it's not about being beautiful. It's about being different and it's about being memorable. And that usually comes from, could be green, it could be the white logo of Apple. It just got to be something.
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you? And I imagine they can get your book anywhere.
Anywhere where books are sold, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, check it out online. But you can find out about me at Reis.com, and that's Ries. All the information there. We have a website as well for the book at strategicenemy.com. And I just launched on Substack, so you can check me out there. Sign up for my newsletters. I even have the positioning hotline where I take fake calls from companies in trouble. And but that's at reis.news.com. But you can find me. Just Google me.
And we will have all those links in the show notes. Laura, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure and so much fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. I love what I do.
What a great show. I mean, Laura is just amazing, and she's so generous with her time and her wisdom. We really appreciate it. It made me think about the strategic enemy our new StoryCycle Genie is up against, and that is to overthrow the overwhelm most business leaders face when defining and refining their brand story. The old way of branding consumes tons of time, wasting massive opportunity costs. Brand development is expensive for both your staff's time and the agency costs that you have to incur to get at least close to your brand story. And what is particularly overwhelming is how to activate your brand story once you've finally developed it, providing, of course, it's actually on brand. Now you can craft a vibrant brand story using all of your business intellect, insights, and intuition in minutes, not months. Create brilliant marketing strategies in a flash, totally based on your brand narrative strategy, and instantly activate your clear, concise, and compelling brand story with focused on-brand content that converts. All at 1/10 of the cost, 1/10 of the time, and 1/10 of the energy using the old-fashioned way of branding. Here's what a few of our numerous users are saying about the StoryCycle Genie.
I can't wait to get my hands on a Park. It's pretty incredible. I mean, it's almost in a way, it's like having Park sit next to you as you're crafting your brand narrative.
You trained it well to know how to prompt, but then I loved when I gave it feedback. I just loved the language that it presented back. It was very conversational. It was very relatable. It was like, that's a great point. I didn't think about that.
I can't wait to use it for my personal brand, like to do a bio, right? Because what it does is it shows you how you're showing up, but it also sort of gives you like a lot of like little chunks that you could use for a bio or for a mission statement or for your about page on your website or whatever, right? You can go in and tune it. Like you said, I think it's really cool. I mean, I've seen AI everywhere, all over the place now, like everybody else has. And it's rare that I see the application of AI actually produce something useful. A lot of times it's like, oh, that's really cool. And then you don't use it, right? Mm-hmm. Your thing is useful. It's actually a useful tool. So I just can't wait till you get out of beta and I can go ham on this thing.
talk about this Genie. It's remarkably good. I ran it on my current audience. Like, I want to run it on my podcast. I want to run it on my new audience. You know, it's genius, right? I mean, what's not to love about it?
I thought it was great. So I saw both a quick output that was more than satisfactory, like, okay, I can work with this. And I also saw the potential for, like, wow, damn. You know, if I were to try the same Genie for clients, for example, man, did you just save a couple weeks of work.
I am loving the StoryCycle Genie so far. I have been calling it the Park Bot internally. Hope you don't mind. It's helped me write 2 social media posts, an email for the folks that responded to our No BS campaign, and a 1-pager, and I've had access to it for 2 whole days. It really is like having direct access to your brain. And you should know that I read the responses in your voice. Thanks.
Now you can test drive the StoryCycle Genie by using the free brand story grader tool at StoryCycleGenie.ai. Then, if you're so inclined, you can define and refine your brand story, create your go-to-market strategy, and produce captivating content in the time it takes you to review an agency's branding proposal and consider whether or not you actually have the time, energy, and budget to pursue it. Your journey begins now at StoryCycleGenie.ai. Thanks for listening to and sharing this edition of The Business of Story. Hey, would you do me a huge favor and jump over to iTunes and give us a rating and review for the show? Because it certainly helps us stand out and get noticed in the absolute noisy world we all compete in. I'd really, really appreciate it. Now, join us next week when the sales energizer Alice Hyman joins us to explore how nothing beats the personal touch to energize your sales, even in this overwhelming day and age of AI and automation. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one great. Thanks so much for listening.